Good evening. Discerning and returning viewers will probably notice that I'm in a different location. This is my first time streaming while traveling. So please be extend me some grace if the stream drops. I'm in Northern California on a writing residency, and there are so many reasons not to do things in this world, and traveling is one. Um, but I just thought I want to keep going. This project means so much to me. I really enjoy it. So even though it's a different location, it's still daylight out. I've brought my mechanical keyboard and I'm ready to jump into chapter 13. I will catch us up as we go along, but for now, how about, like we always do, let's just start. It was a trial to my feelings on the next day but one to see Joe arraying himself in his Sunday clothes to accompany me to Miss Havisham's. However, as he thought his court suit necessary to the occasion, it was not for me to tell him that he looked far better in his working dress. And I'll write now the rest of the paragraph without reading it out and then read it at the end. Rather, because I knew he made himself so dreadfully uncomfortable entirely on my account, and that it was for me he pulled up his shirt collar so very high behind that it made the hair on the crown of his head stand up like a tuft of feathers. So already I'm seeing some differences than when we do this in the previous location, which is Scrivener is auto suggesting words for me to auto complete. We don't want that. I'm going to try and type every word for word. That's the point of this project. Um, just to remind our viewers, Miss Havisham has instructed Pip to, bring Joe to see her, and that she will complete some formality and Pip will begin his apprenticeship as a blacksmith. So that is the context which to start chapter 13. And every time you want to create disharmony between a character and their setting. Janet Burroway, in her classic book Writing Fiction, says whenever there's disharmony between character and setting, that is the makings of a narrative. You already have a story right there. Alice is out of place in Wonderland. John McClane is a New York cop out of place in L.A. In the movie Die Hard, right? So you want people to be uncomfortable. Dorothy is no longer in Kansas, so Joe is going to be leaving his smithy to go to Miss Havisham's. At breakfast time, my sister declared her intention of going to town with us, and being left at Uncle Pumblechook's, and called for when we had done with our fine ladies, a way of putting the case from which Joe appeared inclined to augur the worst. Joe obviously is nervous about being in fine company. Just feel a sneeze come. Yeah, anytime I'm out in the country, in a rural area, my allergies are always active. But, if I tell my students it doesn't matter the quality of the session, if it's 1 out of 10, 3 out of 10, show up at the desk, I try and hold the same true for myself. The forge was shut up for the day, and Joe inscribed in chalk upon the door, as it was his custom to do on the very rare occasions when he was not at work, the monosyllable out, with misspelled, of course, accompanied by a sketch of an arrow supposed to be flying in the direction he had taken. So a little bit of build up to Joe going to Miss Havisham's, we building that sense of disharmony I talked about. We walked to town, my sister leading the way in a very large beaver bonnet and carrying a basket like the great seal of England in plaited straw, a pair of pattens, a spare shawl, and an umbrella, though it was a fine, bright day. It says patins, not patterns. I'll have to look up what that is. I'm not quite clear whether these articles were carried penitentially or ostentatiously. But I rather think they were displayed as articles of property, much as Cleopatra or any other sovereign lady on the rampage might exhibit her wealth in a pageant or procession. She has a strong force of will, Mrs. Joe. When we came to Pumblechook's, my sister bounced in and left us. As it was almost noon, Joe and I held straight on to Miss Havisham's house. Estella, and we know that Pip has really been going through it in this attraction for Estella that Miss Havisham is actively fomenting, but also in her bitterness training Estella to break Pip's heart. Estella opened the gate as usual, and the moment she appeared, Joe took his hat off and stood weighing it by the brim in both his hands, as if he had some urgent reason in his mind for being particular to 1/4 of an ounce. So this is just some idiom, I presume, but Joe is immediately deferential in the presence of someone, you know, born to a higher class than he. Estella took no notice of either of us, but led us the way that I knew so well. I followed next to her, and Joe came last. When I looked back at Joe in the long passage, he was still weighing his hat with the greatest care, and was coming after us in long strides on the tips of his toes. There's a double usage of the word long here. It's a long sentence, and it's really extending the time and the dramatic tension of Joe in this world where he's not in harmony. So the disharmony in this chapter is clearly something Dickens is looking to utilize for its narrative content. Yeah, I'm experimenting with writing some paragraphs and talking after, and then writing as I talk. So just trying different A/B testing, see which works, which people prefer. Estella told me we were both to go in, so I took Joe by the coat cuff and conducted him into Miss Havisham's presence. She was seated at her dressing table and looked round at us immediately. So, just the proeretic code. "Oh," said she to Joe, "you are the husband of the sister of this boy?" I could hardly have imagined dear old Joe looking so unlike himself, or so like some extraordinary bird. Standing as he did, speechless, with his tuft of feathers ruffled, and his mouth open as if he wanted a worm. So at the top of this chapter, with his coat collar, Dickens created this image of a bird for Joe. And as we've seen in previous chapters, what Dickens does is he creates an image and then he hits it many times. He doesn't just use it as a one-off. So here we have a second mention of Joe as a bird. My guess is we're going to see it a few more times in this chapter. And again, I think it's something really we can learn from. If you have taken the time to create a visual, why not keep hitting it so you get the maximum effect out of it? Of course, you have to be artful in how you do so. "You are the husband," repeated Miss Havisham. "Of the sister of this boy." It was very aggravating But throughout the interview, Joe persisted in addressing me instead of Miss Havisham. Which I mean to say, Pip, Joe now observed in a manner that was at once expressive of forcible argumentation, strict confidence, and great politeness, as I up and married your sister, and I were, at the time, what you might call, if you was anyways inclined, a single man. So I wonder if this is a class thing, like not addressing a lady directly, and perhaps Joe is being excessively formal and deferential. Well, said Miss Havisham, and you have reared the boy with the intention of taking him for your apprentice. Is that so, Mr. Gargery? You know, Pip, replied Joe, as you and me were ever friends, and it were looked forward to betwixt us as being calculated to lead to larks. Not but what, Pip, if you had ever made objections to the business, such as its being open to black and soot, or such like, not but what they would have been attended to, don't you see? Has the boy, said Miss Havisham, ever made any objection? Does he like the trade? Which is well beknown to yourself, Pip, returned Joe, strengthening his former mixture of argumentation, confidence, and politeness, that it were the wish of your own heart. I saw the idea suddenly break upon him that he would adapt his epitaph on the occasion, before he went on to say, and there weren't no objection on your part, and Pip, it were the great wish of your heart. It was quite in vain for me to endeavor to make him sensible that he ought to speak to Miss Havisham. The more I made faces and gestures to him to do it, the more confidential, argumentative, and polite he persisted in being to me. So more likely it's just nerves. Joe can't bring himself to speak to Miss Havisham. Have you brought his indentures with you? So this must be the formalities that she wants to complete. Asked Miss Havisham. And he goes on not answering her. Well, Pip, you know, replied Joe, as if that were a little unreasonable. You yourself see me put 'em in my hat, and therefore you know as they are here. So he's really taking this roundabout way of speaking, with which he took them out and gave them not to Miss Havisham, but to me. I was afraid, I was ashamed of the dear good fellow. I know I was ashamed of him when I saw that Estella stood at the back of Miss Havisham, of Miss Havisham's chair, and that her eyes laughed mischievously. I took the indentures out of his hand and gave them to Miss Havisham. Now we get to why Dickens has done this and elongated and dilated this scene so much. Pip has fortified himself against Estella very well. He's practicing hiding his commoner roots, and he's trying to class up. But Estella, being so coached, she knows how to look for a weak spot, and here Pip's love for Joe presents itself as a weak spot, and so Pip is ashamed because Joe, being who he is, a person of such integrity, cannot really conceal who he is. So now we understand why, okay, he thought, how can I deepen and dramatize the Pip-Estella dynamic? I'll bring in Joe. That's a source, that's a hamartia, that's a weakness of Pip's. You expected, said Miss Havisham as she looked them over, no premium with the boy? Joe, I remonstrated, for he made no reply at all. Why don't you answer? Pip, returned Joe, cutting me short as if he were hurt. Which I mean ter say, that were not a question. I think I'm dropping some frames because of the internet. Please bear with me. Hopefully, um, you're still able to get the gist of what I'm saying. Pip, returned Joe, cutting me short as if he were hurt, which I mean to say that were not a question requiring a answer betwixt yourself and me, and which you know the answer to be full well no. You know it be no, Pip, and wherefore should I say it? Basically, I think, as if I'm understanding this correctly, an apprenticeship, usually the master basically commanded a fee, and until the person worked off that fee, they were like indentured to the master. The master was paid for the benefit. It would be sort of like a paid internship, but the other way, where you pay the employer um, because they're giving you skills. And Joe, because of his relationship with Pip, did not basically waived that payment. It sounds like. Let's see if we're correct. Miss Havisham glanced at him as if she understood what he really was better than I had thought possible, seeing what he was there, and took up a little bag from the table beside her. Pip has earned a premium here, she said, and here it is. There are 25 guineas in this bag. Give it to your master, Pip. As if he were absolutely out of his mind with the wonder awakened in him by her strange figure and the strange room, Joe, even at this pass, persisted in addressing me. So Miss Havisham has recognized that Joe is quite an extraordinary person for not wanting to take a premium from Pip. And in recognition of that, she gives him an enormous sum, £25. So that's interesting because it's not like this shows Miss Havisham isn't cheap when she doesn't want to give money to her toady relatives. It's not stinginess. Rather, there's a sense of deserving, and they are undeserving, whereas Joe is deserving. So we get a moral code being established. But Dickens, even in this sort of reward moment, he keeps his characteristic humor with Joe continuing to address Pip. "This is very liberal on your part, Pip," said Joe. "This is very liberal on your part, Pip," said Joe, "and it is as such received and grateful welcome, though never looked for, far nor near nor nowheres. And now, old chap," said Joe, conveying to me a sensation, first of burning and then of freezing, for I felt as if that familiar expression were applied to Miss Havisham. Pip is frightened because it sounds like Joe is calling Miss Havisham old chap. "And now, old chap, may we do our duty. May you and me do our duty, both of us, by one and another, and by them which your liberal present have conveyed to be, for the satisfaction of mind of them as never." So he's sort of losing his train of thought, perhaps, in because he's overwhelmed by the size of the gift, and it was pretty hard to type, to be honest. Here Joe showed that he felt he had fallen into frightful difficulties, until he triumphantly rescued himself with the words, "And from myself far be it." These words had such a round and convincing sound for him that he said them twice. So he's just trying so hard to speak that he just says a load of nonsense. "Goodbye, Pip," said Miss Havisham. "Let them out, Estella." So they've been paid and now they're off. "Am I to come again, Miss Havisham?" I asked. "No. Gargery is your master now. Gargery." One word, so she asked Joe to stay back. Thus Calling him back as I went out of the door, I heard her say to Joe in a distant, emphatic voice, Thus, calling him back as I went out of the door, I heard her say to Joe in a distant, emphatic voice, "The boy has been a good boy here, and that is his reward. Of course, as an honest man, you will expect no other and no more." So, basically, she is saying Pip is now absolved of any ongoing obligation to her and her house. How Joe got out of the room I have never been able to determine, but I know that when he did get out, he was steadily proceeding upstairs instead of coming down, and was deaf to all remonstrances. Until I went after him and laid hold of him. Presumably it's so much money that he's distracted, like all turned around. In another minute we were outside the gate and it was locked, and Estella was gone. When we stood in the daylight alone again, Joe backed up against a wall and said to me, astonishing at intervals, so often that I began to think his senses were never coming back. At length he prolonged his remark into, "Pip, I do assure you, this is astonishing. Astonishing." And so, by degrees, became conversational and able to walk again. So he was completely floored, and there was a lot of time dilation to allow for the moment to really hit. Because I'm in a rural area, I'm sure you guys can hear the roosters crowing. It's definitely a very fun environment to do a live stream, especially like normally it's dark, it's night, but here I am and it's light out and the sun is setting, so it's quite a nice environment. I have reason to think that Joe's intellects were brightened by the encounter they had passed through. And that on our way to Pumblechook's, he invented a subtle and deep design. My reason is to be found in what took place in Mr. Pumblechook's parlor. where, on our presenting ourselves, my sister sat in conference with that detested seedsman. Remember, Pumblechook and Mrs. Joe, they've been quite greedy. They're really hoping something comes of this association between Pip and Miss Havisham. So it'll be interesting to see how Joe, who is normally so transparent, how does he play this? What is his subtle and deep design? Well, cried my sister, addressing us both at once. And what's happened to you? I wonder you condescend to come back to such poor society as this. I am sure I do. As if it's Joe's fault for being invited to Miss Havisham's. Miss Havisham, said Joe with a fixed look at me like an effort of remembrance. Made it very particular that we should give her were it compliments or respects, Pip? Compliments, I said. See, our Pip is very quick. He never misses a trick. So he knows that Joe is recasting the events in a strategic way. Which that were my own belief. We would say that's what I thought, or that's what I thought. Her compliments to Mrs. J. Gargery. Much good they'll do me, observed my sister. But rather gratified too. And wishing, pursued Joe, with another fixed look at me, like another effort of remembrance, that the state of Miss Avisham's health were sich as would have allowed, were it, Pip? Of her having the pleasure, I added. So the two of them, they really work well together, Joe and Pip. Of ladies' company, said Joe, and drew a long breath. Well, cried my sister, with a mollified glance at Mr. Pumblechook. She might have had the politeness to send that message at first, but it's better late than never. And what did she give young Rantipole here? She give him, said Joe, nothing. Mrs. Joe was going to break out, but Joe went on. What she give, said Joe. She give. This autocorrect is killing me. I'll turn it off for our next session. She give to his friends. And by his friends, were her explanation. I mean, into the hands of his sister, Mrs. J. Gargery. Them were her words. Mrs. J. Gargery. She mayn't have knowed, said Joe. Added Joe, with an appearance of reflection. Whether it were Joe or Jorge. No, probably George, not Jorge. Joe or George. My sister looked at Pumblechook, who smoothed the elbows of his wooden armchair and nodded at her and at the fire, as if he had known all about it beforehand. And how much have you got? Asked my sister. So now we get to here's the rub. You know, what is Joe going to say? Is he going to declare the full amount to the IRS? And how much have you got? Asked my sister, laughing. Positively laughing. What would present company say to £10? Demanded Joe. So what do we think? I think she's going to be quite satisfied with that amount. They'd say, returned my sister curtly, pretty well, not too much, but pretty well. It's more than that, then, said Joe. So now he's drawing it out. He's drawing it out to increase the impact. That fearful impostor, Pumblechook, immediately nodded and said, as he rubbed the arms of his chair, It's more than that, Mum. Why, you don't mean to say, began my sister. Yes, I do, Mum, said Pumblechook. But wait a bit. Go on, Joseph. Good in you. Go on. The greed is just seeping out. Go on, Joseph. Good in you. Go on. What would present company say? Proceeded Joe. To £20. Handsome would be the word, returned my sister. So I think Dickens is really showcasing something valuable here. When you have a plot point, how to squeeze maximum juice out of your lemon. This dramatization, it's also doing characterization, really showing the greed of Pumblechook and Mrs. Joe. Handsome would be the word, returned my sister. Well then, said Joe. It's more than £20. That abject hypocrite. Pumblechook nodded again. It's just crazy how Pip's ire for Pumblechook has grown. And said with a patronizing laugh, It's more than that, Mum. Good again. Follow her up, Joseph. Then to make an end of it, said Joe, delightedly handing the bag to my sister. It's £5 and £20. It's £5 and £20, Mum. Echoed that basest of swindlers, Pumblechook, rising to shake hands with her. And it's no more than your merits. As I said when my opinion was asked, and I wish you joy of the money. If the villain had stopped here, his case would have been sufficiently awful. But he blackened his guilt by proceeding to take me into custody with a right of patronage that left all his former criminality far behind. Now you see, Joseph and wife, said Pumblechook. As he took me by the arm above the elbow. And we know Pip doesn't like to be touched by Pumblechook. I am one of them that always go right through with what they've begun. This boy must be bound, out of hand. That's my way. Bound out of hand. Goodness knows, Uncle Pumblechook. Said my sister, grasping the money. I mean, that is a damning verb, grasping. We're deeply beholden to you. Never mind me, Mum, returned the diabolical corn chandler. A pleasure's a pleasure all the world over. But this boy, you know, we must have him bound. I said I'd see to it. To tell you the truth. The justices were sitting in the town hall near at hand, and we at once went over to have me bound apprentice to Joe in the magisterial presence. Oh, that explains what the adjective magisterial, where it comes from. I say we went over, but I was pushed over by Pumblechook. Pip is just an instrument of their greed, and he resents that naturally. Exactly as if I had that moment picked a pocket or fired a rick. Indeed, it was the general impression in court that I had been taken red-handed, for as Pumblechook shoved me before him through the crowd, I heard some people say, "What's he done?" And others, "He's a young'un too, but looks bad, don't he? Poor Pip." One person of mild and benevolent aspect even gave me a tract ornamented with a woodcut of a malevolent young man fitted up with a perfect sausage shop of fetters, and entitled, "To be read in my cell." So Pip looks so bad that people think he's being taken to prison. And I think this is a really good moment that Dickens has constructed, where the moment of Mrs. Joe and Pumblechook's triumph is actually a moment of low agency and lack of freedom and not being seen as a full person for Pip. I think that's really good in writing when the same moment is experienced differently internally by different characters. The hall was a queer place, I thought, with higher pews in it than a church, and with people hanging over the pews looking on, and with mighty justices, one with a powdered head, which they still wear, these powdered wigs, whenever I watch like a YouTube and I see like a justice in the UK or in Australia, and it looks ridiculous to me. Leaning back in chairs with folded arms, or taking snuff, or going to sleep, or writing, or reading the newspapers, and with some shining black portraits on the walls, which my unartistic eye regarded as a composition of hard bake and sticking plaster. Here in a corner, my indentures were duly signed and attested, and I was bound. Mr. Pumblechook holding me all the while. So he's both literally bound and bound in the eyes of the court. As if we had looked in on our way to the scaffold to have those little preliminaries disposed of. So the book is called Great Expectations, and it's a coming-of-age story, and Pip is meant to have some great destiny, but here it looks like his life is ending. When we had come out again and had got rid of the boys who had been put into great spirits by the expectation of seeing me publicly tortured, and who were much disappointed to find that my friends were merely rallying around me, we went back to Pumblechook's. And there my sister became so excited by the 20 and 5 guineas that nothing would serve her but we must have a dinner out of that windfall at the Blue Boar, and that Pumblechook must go over in his chaise cart and bring the Hubbles and Mr. Wopsle. So it's a repeat of the nightmare Christmas dinner for Pip, but here they're celebrating out of his own earnings. It was agreed to be done, and a most melancholy day I passed, for it inscrutably appeared to stand to reason in the minds of the whole company that I was an excrescence on the entertainment. And to make it worse, they all asked me from time to time, in short, whenever they had nothing else to do, why I didn't enjoy myself, and what could I possibly do then but say I was enjoying myself when I wasn't. So this is, this chapter represents, in the windshield wiper of ups and downs of a character, a real down. What is the down? When your seeming and being are not the same. He is unhappy, but is forced to seem another way. And so you're not your true self. And so for a character, it's very important over the course of a story, right, that they inhabit their true selves. And here we see Pip in deep internal disharmony. However, they were grown up and had their own way, and they made the most of it. They have agency and he has none. That swindling Pumberchook, exalted into the beneficent contriver of the whole occasion, which he kind of is, to be honest, actually took the top of the table. And when he addressed them on the subject of my being bound, and had fiendishly, so many devil words, diabolical, fiendish, devilish, had fiendishly congratulated them all, congratulated them on my being liable to imprisonment if I played at cards, drank strong liquors, kept late hours or bad company, because now as an apprentice Pip is subject to a number of rules, or indulged in other vagaries which the form of my indentures appeared to contemplate as next to inevitable. He placed me standing on a chair beside him to illustrate his remarks. So Pip is literally reduced to an object of display, a tool. And I think in a story, you want your character to move from low agency to high agency, to have more power. And here we see Pip with so little power. It's a really great chapter because we're in the middle of the book now. So you want to have windshield wiper, ups and downs. And this is a real down. My only other remembrances of the great festival are that they wouldn't let me go to sleep. He's really being tortured. But whenever they saw me dropping off, woke me up and told me to enjoy myself. That sounds like something in contravention to the Geneva Code. That, rather late in the evening, Mr. Wopsle gave us Collins's Ode. Again, that's a war crime. and threw his blood-stained sword in thunder down. That's a quote from the poem, no doubt. With such effect that a waiter came in and said, the commercials underneath sent up their compliments, and it wasn't the tumbler's arms. Basically, he's so loud that people can hear him downstairs. That they were all in excellent spirits on the road home and sang, O Lady Fair. Mr. Wopsle taking the bass and asserting with a tremendously strong voice, in reply to the inquisitive bore who leads that piece of music in a most impertinent manner, by wanting to know all about everybody's private affairs. So some reference to the lyrics of the song. That he was the man with his white locks flowing, and that he was upon the whole the weakest pilgrim going. So some cultural references, but really the point is all of these festivities and Pip is miserable. Finally, I remember that when I got into my little bedroom, I was truly wretched, poor Pip, and had a strong conviction on me that I should never like Joe's trade. I had liked it once, but once was not now. Basically, having seen Estella, having seen the other side, what's on the other side of the fence or the tracks in American parlance, Pip no longer wants to be a blacksmith. He has new dreams, new yearnings. So it's a very, very good chapter because it's setting some seeds, right? Setting the seeds of future humiliation at the hands of Estella. You know, he was, the money, it can be construed as an insult, right? Like, we didn't really have a friendship. You were just a paid commoner. So that's setting things up. And at this moment of great triumph for Mrs. Joe and Pumblechook, where their greed is sated, he is miserable because he's just an instrument, Pip. He has no agency. And the great expectations don't seem so great at the minute. He's just going to be a blacksmith. But it was very fun to do this in a different environment. The allergies are sort of clogging up my sinuses, so apologies if I sound congested. But I will continue with chapter 14. Thank you all for your time. Have a lovely rest of the evening, and if you're watching this in the future, have the lovely rest of whatever time of day it is.